And the Rebbe gave me a bracha, which at that moment made me feel that I'm going to dedicate my life to the Rebbe shlichus. And the bracha that he gave me was that I should be zeicha to be mina oisin u'masim acherim lasos. And I didn't really understand what that meant in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But the Rebbe explained to help other people carry out their duties as Jewish people.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2024. My name is Bosi Avtzon, and I will be your host. Let's begin. Alrighty, so we are here, a very special Jubilee episode of Homesick for Lubavitch, episode number 50, and it's my honor to have my father here on the podcast, Rabbi Mordechai Avtzon, shliach in Hong Kong, first shliach in Far East Asia, and I believe at the time quite a bit more than Far East Asia. I mean, in terms of being the first in that part of the world. It's actually last week was a kinnis, and a thought occurred to me, I think over Shabbos, that at the time that you went out, I believe you were the furthest away, probably by quite a bit, from a functioning Jewish community, or you could even like a functioning minyan. Like, what was the closest minyan at the time?
Sydney or Melbourne?
Or someone said maybe Brisbane. Brisbane's also 8.5 hour flight. You're talking about a continent away. You're talking about a serious flight away, anywhere, in any direction.
Right.
Yeah. Singapore, there were some traditional Jews, but they weren't a functioning community. They came to you, correct?
Yeah, it was a struggling community in those days.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when, who was the name of the guy who used to come to Hong Kong before Abergel? Like the balabas who used to come to Hong Kong, the Singapore balabas. Used to come for business.
Mr. Khafi.
Mr. Khafi, yes.
Sure, very good friend.
Yeah. So I say that just to point out that, 40 years. I should also point out specifically, you told me that this coming Chinese New Year, which is about February time, so in a couple months, it will be 40 years since you went to Hong Kong.
Correct.
So, I don't say that to brag on behalf of my father. Frankly, anybody listening to the podcast knows that I'm conflicted about the idea of shlichus so far away from a functioning community. I don't know it's something to brag about, but it's just a fact. I say it more because, as I get older, and I am now a father of children who are, the eldest is over 10. That's more or less the time that I remember well growing up in Hong Kong. And of course I have memories from earlier, but the time that I remember well is their age. And so I begin to think about what it must mean to raise kids and raise a family in Hong Kong on shlichus, that far away from anything functioning. It's quite a thing. There's no question about it. And I think in terms of the people listening to this podcast, I think it would be very interesting for them, but also interesting for me to kind of get the backstory. When you grow up, I'm obviously your son. I grew up in your home. You take a lot of things for granted. I took a lot of things for granted, and I probably still do. But there's a backstory, and it's worth exploring.
Right. And you also left home very young.
I left home young, yes.
Which is not a simple story.
No.
And maybe we'll get to that later. But before we start with my story, I just want to say that while I'm your father and Adam Korovitz Alatzmai, this podcast is providing an incredible service. I'm hearing it from the most likely and the most unlikely sources of people that, including many people who were skeptical about this podcast, but it's becoming a true discussion, a genuine discussion where people are able to question in a respectful but in an analytical way. And I think that this is well overdue, and a big yasher koach for doing this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, to start with my story, I'll start just a little bit with my parents' home, where I was born in Detroit,
Right.
as you know, obviously. And it was an interesting childhood because we lived in Detroit where there were not that many Frum Yidden at the time.
Right.
And certainly not Hamish and Chassidish families.
Right.
So while your average friend had maybe one or two siblings, we were kind of like the ones that stood out even before the Rebbe came out with the mitzvah of having large families.
Right.
A family of 15 people,
Right.
15 children. And it was quite a contrast to the backdrop of Detroit.
Right.
And a family that was makpid on Chov Yisrael. People didn't even know what that means in those days.
Right.
To them, you went to the grocery and you bought a carton of milk.
Right.
It's just simple as that. The idea of having Mesiras Nefesh not only on Yiddishkeit, but on Chassidus and on proper adherence to the minhagim and so on. This was quite a big story in Detroit. Many people kind of were puzzled. Others almost felt bad for us. And others admired us tremendously. As you know, my parents were not...
How did you feel about yourselves? Did you feel bad for yourself?
I don't remember ever feeling bad for myself. My parents and my mother particularly gave me a sense of...
Just for those who don't know, your parents are Meir and Chen Avtzon.
Right.
Right.
And
We're gonna have to do that a few times today.
Okay.
No, because of course I know it, but other people don't.
Right.
Yeah.
So my parents, their story was survival under Stalin.
Right.
And survival of the Hunger Years.
Right.
My mother lost both of her parents at a very young and tender age. And
she buried them with her own hands, didn't she?
One of them she buried with her own hands, and she had to stay and watch over the kever all night long to make sure that she would still have it in the morning. Some of the details are not so clear to me, but some of my brothers know the story better.
Did she ever speak about it?
Very rarely, because she didn't want to arouse those feelings. But she was a person of action, and her response to all those Hunger Years and seeing so many people die on the street was that if she would survive the war and she would be married, she would have as many children as possible. So much so that a well-known story in our family that after a good several children before I was born.
You are.
I'm number 10 of 15.
Right.
And my mother was expecting a child and had a very difficult miscarriage. And the doctors struggled to save her life. The baby was lost, of course. And they told her that she should never try to have any more children because she's putting her life in danger. And my mother's response was, Lo mazeh anochi. My purpose is to bring as many Yiddish kinder into the world. And she wrote to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe responded that the function of a doctor is spelled out clearly in the Torah, v'rape yirape,
Right.
and not to be goys or gezeres.
Right.
And the Eberstedt helped him that you'll have many more children. And she went on to have another 8 or 9 children after that. Not sure exactly where it happened, but I think it was 9 children more. And
So this was also quite a few more kids than other Lubavitcher families.
in those days, for sure.
Right. Did that feel strange?
To us, it was just who we were. And
So you were at the time the largest family that you knew of? Not just Klappe, the secular community.
I think we heard of another family. I think there was a Yarmish family. And in fact, down the street from us was another family, which was not Chabad, but very close and good friends, the Goldstein family. And they had 13 children, but...
so it wasn't unheard of, but it was uncommon.
It was uncommon, right? And interestingly, in spite of having so many children and being so involved in the community, I never felt that my mother was inaccessible. On the contrary, I felt that she was always available and never felt shortchanged.
I guess maybe to dig a little bit deeper, maybe you'll get to this soon, but just to frame it, you're growing up in, you were growing up in Detroit, they wouldn't call it suburban America, but America, Midwest America.
Right. Or in those days, they would just call it out of town.
Out of town. No, they still call it. The New Yorkers, if anything, call it more out of. They're more like that today. But where you lived was not suburban America.
Well, where I was born was not suburban America.
Right.
But when that part of the city became uninhabitable for Jewish people and became a very dangerous city,
right.
So most of the Jews did migrate to the suburbs.
So where was the suburbs?
Suburbs started at like 8 Mile Road.
Oh, that's already suburban America?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's considered. Oh, so you were.
It wasn't the posh suburban, but it was the suburban already.
So you were born more in the city.
Oak Park and Southfield is suburban America.
So you were born more in the city.
Born in the city. But by the time I was like 10 years old, I was already living in suburban America.
Oh, Oak Park. So you grew up. In suburban America in this is the 60s, late 60s.
Right.
So just whatever image you have of America in the late 60s, it's certainly very I would think upbeat. Maybe not. Maybe already then was it Vietnam? Not yet. Was Vietnam starting? I don't know if you would have paid.
We were quite sheltered.
I don't know if you would have I don't know if you would pay attention to it. My point is more that the suburbs were exploding at the time. The affluence was exploding at the time because after the wars, when the suburbs really took off, and you are here in a family of 15, which is very un-American at the time, right? So, did you feel American? You had 2 very Russian parents, refugees, immigrants, probably spoke a broken English. I don't know. Zadie, I never met Bobby, but Zadie, I don't think I ever spoke English.
Not properly, no.
Yeah, I don't remember speaking at all. But Bobby spoke English, probably broken.
She spoke English with a very heavy accent.
Right. So they weren't Americans. Did you feel American?
I think in those days, people's identity was, people were not so busy with worrying about their identity. Life was just much simpler in those days than it is today.
Well, I think life always simpler when you're a child. It's more looking back. Did you feel like you shared reality with your parents or not? I don't think you thought of it in those terms at the time.
No, we just felt very blessed that we were born in America and not have to go through the suffering and the fear and the dread that we understood that they went through almost on a daily basis. So we felt very blessed.
Right, because it's a very interesting, I don't know what the word is, but it's interesting to think about because if your parents are both refugees who escaped the horrors of the old world, right? And yet Lubavitch, in terms of its narrative and mythology, is all in that world, right? The Amalek Chassidim, the Amalek Yeshivas, Amalek Deirs, right? Your father went to Tenchatum somewhere in Russia and so on. So is that a world that you look back on with fondness and yearning, or is that a world that you're happy to have escaped? And I think that, that translates also to the child growing up in America. Is this a promised land, or is this a Goyshe Medina? That's what I'm trying to get to.
I never gave that much thought, but I think that my father was very grateful to make it to America, and he knows that America is a country that opened its arms to him and his family. But at the same time, he was even more conscious of the dangers of America in those days, because America was known as the melting pot.
Right, of course.
And he said, this is not going to happen with me, and I'm going to try to make sure that it doesn't happen with my family either.
Did he mind when you played baseball, for example?
He didn't mind if we played baseball, but when he would find out that we would sneak over to a friend's house and watch baseball on the television, that was a little different.
That was not okay.
That was not so okay.
So you could play sports, but you can't follow the sports.
Yeah, I mean, to him, it was at best a waste of time, and besides that, to him, television in the house was proper avodah zarah.
Could you go to a baseball game?
Probably if we didn't tell him.
Actually, yeah.
I mean, if the school was going, then and it was properly supervised.
So is that something that you at some point look back at with is that something that you feel that you wanted to you wanted to grow out of and become your own man and be able to watch baseball? Was or Look, I'm not trying so much to psychoanalyze your childhood. I think it's an important question, because the generation of mine growing up, and we'll soon find out about the generation of our children, but the generation of mine growing up grapples a lot with this, disconnect or distance between generations, and it's always interesting to me to figure out when it began. I mean, a lot of people my age think that people your age, our parents, are more similar to their parents than we are to. Many people my age think that the distance between you and your parents is closer than the distance between your generation and us. Right? That's what a lot of people think. I happen to be unsure about that. I would even say I happen to think it's wrong. I think that at the end of the day, my generation and your generation, for the most part, was born here, whereas they were born there. That's a much vaster distance that's harder to negotiate. But I think so I think that's why I'm asking. I'm not trying to over psychoanalyze your childhood, but that's what I'm trying.
No, my view on this, and maybe it's simplistic, is that my parents faced existential issues.
Right.
You either conformed to Russia, or you were harassed and persecuted and often killed, or sent to Siberia, never to come back home or never to return to normalcy. So they kind of viewed, and my father and mother were different in the sense. My father was a little bit more on the edge with this, because he was running from the KGB for years, and that became kind of his built-in psyche. But he saw the challenges of America, while they were not as malicious and as harsh as the ones in Russia. He saw them no less threatening to our identity. And in a large sense, he's right. He was right, because in America, you just take life a little bit more relaxed. It's impossible for us as children born in America to have been to be as intense as he was with that fear. So we learned to respect it, But we were, of course, much more chilled on that. Going to a baseball game is not going to be the end. It's not going to be it's not going to be the end of the world. But to him, America was a Medina shel Chesed, but a very treifene Medina, a very, very unkosher place, and that a person had to be as careful about the threats of the cat as the threats of the rat.
Right. Right. So he felt relieved to be away from the KGB, but he was still on edge.
Oh, there's no question about it.
Not just from the paranoia of the KGB, but from America itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it carried over,
Right.
and he saw how many people in America had grandparents who were frum,
Right.
and they were completely out to lunch as far as Yiddishkeit was concerned. And he knew that if he's going to just lay back on this, his chances of witnessing that would be very high. So he was very determined, first and foremost by personal example, to, he would get up early in the morning and he would learn every day, and he would learn with us and constantly remind us of where we came from. And of course he did it in a much more Russian, old school kind of way.
Mm.
But nonetheless, he was definitely a towering figure and a very inspirational figure, and his love for Yiddishkeit was unquestionable. So it was begeder dvar mayotzim min halev nechnas min halev, to varying degrees.
And you said your mother was different?
My mother was much more pragmatic and reaching out to people rather than analyzing them or lamenting their relaxed attitude to Yiddishkeit.
Mm.
And she was she was admired by the entire community as being an activist. She welcomed hundreds of families from Russia and organized brissen for them and helped them find work. And
so she made herself at home here, basically.
And right, so she was much more your typical. She behaved like a typical shlucha would behave.
Right.
In those years.
Right. Right. I mean, it also shows that she learned English.
Right.
Whereas your father did not.
Right. Also because my father came to America and had to start working right away to provide for a family.
Right. I'm sure there were other reasons, yeah, but you're describing a logical reason. If he was more suspicious of America,
right,
then there would be less of an interest in learning its language, and the first step to assimilating is to learn the language.
Right.
Right. Whereas your mother. So at home, I imagine your parents spoke Yiddish. Both of them spoke Yiddish.
To each other for sure. My mother and my father spoke only Yiddish to us.
Right.
And my mother practiced her English with us.
Ah, so she did speak to you in English.
Yeah, I mean, very often she spoke to us in Yiddish as well, but she liked practicing English.
Uh-huh.
And she, she
right.
spoke with a very heavy Russian accent.
Right.
But she definitely felt that this was necessary. Otherwise, how could she be effective here? And she saw her presence in Detroit as an opportunity to bring Yiddishkeit in a warm and welcoming way to as many people as possible.
Did you? So I mean, so you're basically an immigrant's child, which is not particular or unique to Lubavitch. The immigrant's children growing up in America is a story as old as America itself, of course. But did you see America as like your future? It was like, this is where my parents are unsure about it, but this is my place.
Oh yeah, as growing up as a child, we were very, I would say, even proud Americans. Proud Jewish Americans, as a place that we can live as a proud Jew,
Right.
and as a place that we have rights like anybody else.
So you were Americans.
Absolutely.
This week's episode is brought to you by This World is a Garden, a new film and concert production by Yuvla Media. Based on the Rebbe's first talk, Bosi Lgani, the production tells the story of the Chabad vision lasting over 300 years, to see this world as God sees it, as His garden. Combining beautiful cinematography with a live performance of a string quartet, This World is a Garden is a meditation on hope and holding on to a vision as time passes by. This production is now available to be shown at your Chabad house and community. Share the message and vision of Bosi Lgani with your community in a way you never have before. For more information, please visit thisworldisagarden.com. You're describing growing up in America as, obviously there's no way back to Russia. You're not going back to Russia. It's not desired. It's also not possible at the time. This is still obviously during the Iron Curtain. So America is where it's at. America is where it's at. How does being a Lubavitcher boy fit into America in your mind?
I think that we were fortunate in Detroit that it was less people there are in what New Yorkers call out of town are much less judgmental about one another, and they we lived in a community,
Midwestern,
and, right, and it was a very communal feeling. And yes, you have Chabad minhagim, but it was not a big deal. So much so that, in fact, this was before Lubavitch really set down its roots in Detroit,
right,
with shluchim and so on. As a child, our shul was a Satmar Stiebel.
So there were Satmar Chassidim.
Yeah, there was a Satmar Yid. His name was Reb Sender Deitch.
Right.
And he was a very nice man.
A Streimel or more?
Oh.
A full of wush?
Full on. Shmoyne Begudim.
No, because there are a lot of Satmar Chassidim
but Shmoyne Begudim and so on.
Right.
And there was a Satmar Stiebel, and I remember even some of his Nusach and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
What was he doing in Detroit?
I don't know. There were probably a couple of Yidden from Hungary or from Czechoslovakia, or that part of Eastern Europe, that probably told him to come there, and they would help him start a Stiebel.
That was his job.
He was like a shtickle rebbe, and we were mispalim by him in his shul, and everything was hunky dory. It was everyone just got along with each other. It became a little tense after the 6-Day War, when the Rebbe came out and said that this is a miracle equal to the miracles of Tanakh, and so on and so forth. And Satmar claimed that this was the koyach of the Sitra Achra, and it became a little bit tense.
Right.
That, Treifen et Tziyonim, and so on, right?
Right.
But until then, everybody just did their thing, and people were less focused on what, it was just a simpler existence.
Right. Right. I think, I don't know if I've shared it on the podcast, but I went a couple years ago to Detroit for a project, for a film project.
I remember.
Yeah. And I went there to interview Rabbi Yudi Bakst, who's today the Rosh Yeshiva of the, I forget the name of the yeshiva.
It used to be part of Beis Yehuda, but now it has its own name.
Right. The Litvish Yeshiva in Detroit, which is only a few blocks from where the Lubavitch Yeshiva used to be, I think.
Right.
Anyway, I met with him, and he already beforehand told me, "Oh, you're Avtzon, I know your uncles." So I already knew that he knew the family. But when I met him, he was so warm about it, and he was telling me how he verbringed this Kislev as a little boy with Zaydi Avtzon, and I think your brother Isaac was his age. There were two little boys he was verbringing with. He had nobody else to verbring with or something. And it just struck me that he was at the time the son of his father, who was at the time the Rosh Yeshiva. I think, right?
Yeah.
The Rabbi Bach Senior was Rosh Hashiva, was the first Rosh Hashiva there. Now I think it's two brothers. So he was describing an era where the son of the Litvish Rosh Hashiva was upbringing with Meir Avtzon and Yitzhak Kislev. And I think he even said that he, I don't know if I should say on the podcast, but, the upbringing of Yitzhak Kislev. And yeah, so it does sound like, and it's not only Detroit, but you hear it all over the place. It does sound like there was a time where in these smaller communities, people didn't have large enough communities to segregate. People needed each other more.
It was a post-war generation,
right?
And Jews were in the mode of were survivors.
Is that what it was?
And also, at the risk of getting trapped in cliches, I think the 60s and the early 70s, maybe even throughout the 70s, were golden years. There was much less machlokes between Yidden, and people did not demarcate themselves that this is my way and this is the highway. This is reflected by the fact in those days, how many Lubavitcher Bachrim in those days married out of Lubavitch. It was totally common.
Right. No, we had someone on the podcast talk about it. I think Genki Tauber spoke about it in one of the episodes. How he felt that it was even into the 80s that the community, Lubavitch was a lot more fluid with other communities.
Right.
And then it kind of like shut its gates, or maybe the gates were shut on it from the outside.
Right.
Whatever. But it's yes. That's an interesting conversation for itself. But for the sake of this conversation, I suppose my question is, where are you? You're the son of immigrants. Their world is not available to you, right? Their path of life, what their story, their example, in a strict literal sense, is not available to you, right? Right. You can't join. Your father didn't build a family business for you to join, right? He obviously didn't have a family business. His way of life, his whole trajectory was not available to you. So, what do you see as a kid growing up? What's your path? What's your path? Like a lot of immigrant kids, their parents work super hard. At a menial job very often, so that their kids can go to college, so that they can kind of climb the American ladder.
Right. So I can't remember exactly when this dawned on me, but from a very young age, I was very inspired by the stories that my parents went through in Russia. And I remember clearly when I was 11 or 12 years old, Russia started to open up and to let Jews out.
Right.
And it was actually possible to buy out families and buy them visas to America.
Right.
It sounds like a joke today, but in those days you could buy out a family for like $2,000.
Right. Well, $2,000 then was a lot
more.
Yeah,
$2,000, and I took it upon myself with a couple of friends that we were going to raise $2,000. And by the time I became bar mitzvah, I had only raised a few $100s. I remember, in fact, the exact amount, because my father always reminded me that it was B'gematria Eliezer 318. And he suggested that I take it to the Rebbe in Yechidus and tell him about my activities.
Right.
So I took it.
1 second. How did you raise the money?
Well, by making picnics and by going door to door with little milk cartons that had little like piggy banks in them, and that had a bear on them. In Russia was the animal, the symbol of Russia is a bear.
So basically, people were giving you quarters, maybe a dollar bill.
Yeah, no, a $1 was a huge donation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, sounds like Detroit.
Yeah. You're talking about the early 70s.
So I had to put it in there.
Right. Yeah. Late 60s, early 70s, right?
I'll do him.
Okay. But it was a lot of fun, and My father encouraged me to take it to the Rebbe, and I just innocently went along with that idea. And when I came to Yechidus, my father mentioned to the Rebbe. I don't remember if he said it to the Rebbe or he wrote it to the Rebbe that I've been doing this, and the Rebbe gave me a bracha, which at that moment made me feel that I'm going to dedicate my life to the Rebbe shlichus.
Mm-hmm.
And the bracha that he gave me was that I should be zeicha to be mina oisin u'masim acherim lasos. And I didn't really understand what that meant in those days, but the Rebbe explained to help other people carry out their duties as Jewish people. So in my young mind at that time, I said Amen, and my thought was that I want to be the Rebbe shliach.
Was it in terms of shlichus already in those days? Because what you were doing up to that point was more a typical kind of Jewish askanas, right?
Right. But I was
The way the Rebbe described it wasn't so much shlichus; it was more
right. Correct. But just to be in the Rebbe's service, to extend my life and to do more and more of that.
Because I think it's an important question here, because was shlichus yet was that like a word in circulation? That's how people described.
I would say that my knowledge of shlichus in those days, on a scale of 1 to 10, was maybe one or 1.5. But the point is that when you walked into the Rebbe's room, in those days when you could still have Yechidus, the Rebbe was totally captivated every fiber of your being, because he was focused on you as if there was nothing else going on in his life. So much so that the Rebbe, and I understand that this was typical in those days, asked my father if the bar mitzvah boy is going to be saying something in honor of his bar mitzvah.
So this is your bar mitzvah yechidus.
Yeah, my bar mitzvah
So the story
yechidus.
started when you were 11 or 12,
Yeah.
but this is already at your bar mitzvah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Until I started raising money, it took a few months, and we just spoke about it with kids and so on and so forth. Everything was kind of at slow pace in those days.
So this was a bar mitzvah.
This was at bar mitzvah, and the Rebbe asked my father, is the bar mitzvah boy going to say something? Of course, he said it in Yiddish. So my father hinted to me to say the Maimer. So like a typical Lubavitch boy, I held onto the table, and I started shaking.
You're wearing a hat
bit.
Already?
I went in with a hat, yes.
So you were bar mitzvah already?
It was the week before my bar mitzvah, so I was already putting on tefillin.
All right, okay.
In those days, we didn't put on a bin tam until we were 18, but I was wearing a hat, and I said Isabel der Stillim, and the Rebbe listened to me for about a line or two, and he said with a twinkle in his eye, "At the Minyan habe ich gerade gehört, kama v'kama pa'amim." I heard this a number of times, for the benefit of those who don't speak Yiddish. Is he going to say something in Nigla? So my father said that he was learning with me the first year that in yeshiva we were learning that year Kedushin, and that he was learning with me the first year of Rabbi Yehuda Eber, Hashem Yinkum Damai,
Right.
from Shara Yehuda.
Right.
So the Rebbe says no.
Right.
So I started saying this year the Pilpul.
Right.
And the Rebbe started asking me questions. And at about the 7th or 8th question, I started to struggle. And the Rebbe didn't allow me, and I understand that this was common to many other bar mitzvah yechidus, didn't allow me to sizzle in my embarrassment that I didn't have an answer for him. As soon as he saw the bar mitzvah bocher struggle, that's when he showered brachas. Like there was nothing else in the world. And the connection that one felt, I mean, of course in Lubavitch we were trained differently, but it was a kind of experience that you would want to walk over to the Rebbe and give him the biggest hug. Like having a loving Zaidi which I didn't have grandparents at all, and this was like
That's interesting. That's interesting. So, but Rebbe wasn't much older than your father, was he?
the Rebbe was about 10 years older.
Right.
Or
So it wasn't.
8
He
years
wasn't. He wouldn't even have been technically his
No,
age.
but still,
But the stature, yeah.
the stature and so on,
Right.
and you saw, and I saw the way my father had such incredible respect for the Rebbe,
Right.
and stood there like like
That's also interesting. Your father was a chassid of the Rebbe, obviously, back in the day.
he was.
Right. And he, but it was the same.
Absolutely, he didn't struggle in transition at all.
That's always a very interesting thing to me. I mean, a lot of people today, in a way, this question is completely irrelevant at this point, but, a lot of people today like to question the chassidim of the Rebbe for struggling to make a transition to the Rebbe after. And then you ask them, well, how quickly would you move on if you had, the opportunity? Like, the real heated up Bikusharim, like how quickly would you give that up?
Yeah. I don't know if this is in the right spirit, but there's unfortunately there's a lot of people in amongst us and in Lubavitch that have opinions on things that are not all that well thought out, and it's very easy to be critical of other people.
Right.
And
your father Pashat was Meiser Nefesh under the guidance of the Rebbe. Like he literally laid down his life under the guidance
absolutely
of the Rebbe. So, the idea that when the Rebbe passes away, he just transfers that allegiance to his son-in-law, who he maybe never even heard of before, because if the Rebbe didn't. In America, I guess the Rebbe was involved with the Rebbe, but in Russia, where your father was where was the last contact with the Rebbe, right?
Right.
The Rebbe was not in public at all as an heir apparent. He was not involved in the court of the Rebbe at all, at least not publicly. For him to transfer his loyalty to the Rebbe, like that's not a obvious thing to happen. Right?
Of course.
Right. But I do want to circle back a little bit to you talking about deciding that you want to go on shlichus vis-a-vis thinking of askanas, because growing up in Hong Kong, growing up in your Chabad house, I actually sensed, at least compared to what I would see later on in life, at the time I took it for granted, but it was, I wouldn't say it was less shlichus, but I did not, I felt that there was always this idea of spreading Yiddishkeit. Like that was always that was the mission, period, end of story. It wasn't this thing of like, being on shlichus for the sake of, being a bigger chassid. At least I did not feel that was the motivation there. I felt not that it was not the motivation, but I didn't feel like that was the goal to be a big makusher, and that's why we're here in Hong Kong. Like we're here in Hong Kong to spread Yiddishkeit to people that need it. At least that's what I sensed. And I also sensed in the fact that like you always you very often would talk about other kinds of askanim, not Lubavitch. I remember you mentioned a few times a Rav in Panama. I forget his name.
Levy.
Yes. There were different people that were involved in Afat Sayadis, and not Afat Samayadis, Afat Sayadis, that you felt a kinship to, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So that's why I feel like it's important to point out. How did you view this commitment that you made as a young teenager, was it to eventually, yes, you didn't go, you went to Hong Kong. The only reason you ended, and we'll get to the story later, the only reason you ended up in Hong Kong was for shlichus, obviously. Nobody else was insane enough to send somebody there or to go there on their own accord, obviously. But it seems like there was a commitment to Yiddishkeit, and not so much. I don't know. Not so much this. I need to be a shliach because that's a, you know what I mean.
In fact, I think that's correct, and I think that that is attributed to the fact that my understanding, and may Hashem forgive me if I'm wrong, but my understanding from the Rebbe was that he was a shining example of Yiddishkeit, and that it's not about the Chabad way or the highway.
Right.
Chabad, to me, the Rebbe was committed to bringing people back to Yiddishkeit, and if they find their way in a Sephardi shul, wonderful. If they find their way by going back to roots of their Hungarian roots, that's also fine.
Right.
The Rebbe was interested in bringing children back home.
Right.
And the Rebbe very much recognized that there are many, harbi drachim lamokim, and we can't take like some people say how many kapatas you have in your shul.
Right.
I don't think that's what determines the success.
Right.
How many Yidden are starting to keep Shabbos? To me, that's what really counts. To take the Lubavitch edge of it and supersede that over everything else, I think is a disservice.
Right.
To personally, I'm sure some people would debate that, and everyone entitled to their opinion.
Right.
But I see the Rebbe first and foremost concerned that Yidden should reconnect with their roots.
Yeah, I mean, it also played out in Hong Kong. I don't know that this was the cause of it, but it did play out in Hong Kong that, unlike, I mean, there are other shluchim like this too, but by and large, I don't think that most shluchim have to worry about their Jewish infrastructure from literally ground up, right? Like, there's kosher food, but you want Lubavitch shchita. There's a mikveh, but you want ber al gabi ber. There's especially today, there's more and more Jewish infrastructure around you, and then you want to be more particular. You want your kids to have a Lubavitch chinuch as opposed to a stam Yiddish chinuch, and so on. Right? Hong Kong, I remember, you literally have to, every single thing starts from zero. Right? There's no kosher, literally. No kosher. There's no mikveh. I mean, the mikveh happened before I was born, but I remember the kosher being a thing. We didn't have any dairy growing up. So everything, you're fighting for Yiddishkeit. You're not fighting for the Lubavitch and Hagim. I mean, that you're also fighting for that, but you're not. But
100%.
Right.
I don't think there's much to add to that, because I think that's the Rebbe's kavanah.
Right.
And I think that's the obvious priority in Yiddishkeit.
I mean, I'm not trying to get you to argue with some people out there. I am just commenting on how I observed it as especially in many ways, as I got older and I started seeing other ways of Chabad houses and shlichus and other ways that people described it, and I began to realize more and more that there was, in my opinion, a profound difference or distinction between, what I had grown up with compared to what a lot of others had grown up with. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you tied back to that bar mitzvah yechidus, and even the way that the Rebbe described the bracha that the Rebbe gave you was you also described your mother's pragmatism. It sounded very like a pragmatic kind of bracha almost, in the sense like help other people, help people. What do you say? It was right. Help people do it themselves.
Right.
Right. And I mean, just to be clear, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of Bali Tshuva that have come out of your Chabad house, and many of them are very close to Lubavitch, and many of them are Lubavitchers. It's not like you were pushing people away from it, right? But there was a sense, at least growing up, that we're here for Yiddishkeit. It's also like it's funny. I know we're kind of jumping off on a tangent here, but probably about a year ago, to some of my kids' dismay, I don't even know I don't know like why it happened, but this childhood memory of the Majid's Baruch Kalelian being sung in the shul on Shabbos day, because we haven't gotten up to it, but by the time I was growing up, or actually for the years of like when I before I left home to yeshiva, those years was when most of your activity on Shabbos, at least, was with the out of town guests, the businessmen who came in from out of town, and most of them were from, obviously, if they're coming to shul, on most of them, not all of them, but most of them were Hamish from Eden, from all kinds of different walks of life, Chassidish, Litvish, Yisraelic, like everybody was mixed in this one shul, which was a really phenomenal kind of experience, especially looking back. Very unusual. And I just remember, for whatever reason, that like there was this niggin that would stick out to me, the Majid Baruch Kalelian. I don't know, I guess it was sung a few times a year by the people that like the song, and the part of Asher Kol Chaycha, that when the niggin kind of goes up, stuck with me. I also remember Lubavitch and Nagunim growing up. I remember that too, but I don't know how many shluchim's kids would say that one of their like distinct childhood memories is a Majid Baruch Kalelian being sung by who knows who in their Chabad house. And I sing it now quite often, almost every Shabbos at home. It's just interesting how the shape of the shlichus that you undertook was, in my estimation, very much a continuation of the activity that you did as a teenager, of raising money for Russian Jews.
Right. A lot of people use the sisma, or maybe it's even a cliche, Chassidim ein mishpocha.
Right.
My upbringing made me look at it that Klal Yisrael ein mishpocha.
Interesting, yeah.
And to me, I remember there was a Yid, we used to have a moil, used to come out to Hong Kong, his name was Brudi Stern.
I don't remember him.
And his cousin was Sholem Berstein, a businessman that would come in, and he would say in the early 80s, and in the early 90s, that the world is busy critiquing Chabad. Mashiach is coming, is not coming, he's here already, he's not here already. He said, Ich weiß nicht, I don't know what to say on this subject. But I can tell you that maybe to London he hasn't come, and maybe to New York he hasn't come, but to Hong Kong he's here already.
That's
Because
what this guy said.
yes, because we sit here, Vizhnitzer, Satmar, Belzer, Chabadsker, Litvish, Kippas Ruga, non-religious, non-religious. We sit all as one family, and we put aside all of our differences, and we have an amazing experience of Yiddishkeit.
Yeah.
So to me, if Hasidim is ein mishpacha, then Klal Yisrael should be one mishpacha as well.
Yeah, I remember growing up. I mean, there was always the shul in the Chabad house always included different minhagim, and you also allowed people sometimes to use their own nusach or use certainly their own tunes during davening. It was very kind of a melting pot of different minhagim and flavors, and obviously all kafir halacha. To clarify, there wasn't some kind of jamboree of nonsense, but it was very. There were Svardische leanings, Svardische chazonim, and all very mixed. I mean, one of your best friends, in terms of the businessman coming through for me growing up, was Uncle Yosh, also wall handler, who, I don't know what he calls himself today, but he used to be a Satmar Chassid, right?
Certainly was raised that way, right?
Right, and dressed that way for sure.
Right.
And he still wears a shtreimel on Shabbos. Right, and that was normal. He's your good friend, and we called him Uncle Yossel. It could be it's more common than I think it is, but I think it's just worth emphasizing a little.
Yeah, as a young shliach, it was very meaningful to me when one time we invited Rabbi Emmanuel Shachat Alav Shalom to Hong Kong,
right,
for a series of lectures.
He came a few times.
I think he came 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
But I think it was on the first trip that he came, and he said, "This is the kind of Chabad house that the Rebbe had in mind when he started sending shluchim."
Mamish.
Yeah.
What did he explain?
Yeah, he said, this is the place that really cares about Yidden, where they are, how they are, and is not busy,
litigating.
Exactly. I don't know if he used the word litigating, but that was the substance of what he said.
Yeah.
Or advocating one way or another way.
I mean, I think that's probably one of the nice things of being in Hong Kong, for all its challenges, is that you kind of, in a way, are away from, like you're talking earlier about how in Detroit after the war everybody's trying to survive, like maybe in a more physical, material sense, but in a Jewish sense, Hong Kong people are trying to survive religiously. I mean, there are plenty of politics. I don't know how much that in the community, but in terms of the people that came to live there and came to visit, there's no other choice. You got to make it work together, right? And there's you opened up a school, the school that I went to as a boy, and I'm sure it was a conscious choice to not make it a Chabad school per se, but to ensure instead that this school would be a community school that had as its backbone a standard of from halachic Yiddishkeit. Right. Like, I'm sure that was a choice to say we can include more people and more children in this school
and be more inclusive.
Yes.
Right, and I think it's worth sharing with the listeners of this podcast that when we made the school, which clearly we established it,
right,
and it's acknowledged as such, but as the discussions with the community evolved, and we realized that there were certain things that are very important to Chabad that we might have to give a pass on, I was wondering if I perhaps failed to be mechaven to the kavan of the Rebbe.
Right.
And
Give an example of something that's like that you're not insisting on as a Lubavitcher.
for one of the issues in the community was the long-standing families that are established over there, and we weren't 100% sure about their gerus and so on and so forth, and their yuchsin and so on. And we knew that the community was not going to stand up and disallow these children to come to the school,
Right.
and so on. And I felt that if this was going to be a project that the community was going to embrace and support,
Right.
but then I thought that maybe some other people kind of hinted to me that maybe I was being a little bit too relaxed and too
Karl Bachian.
too Chabakuk kind of in this whole thing. So I actually discussed it with your Zaidi. I discussed it with Mashver, and he said, "Look, you can't ask the Rebbe now that you've done that if this is the right thing. You have to find a different way to write it." So he suggested that I write to the Rebbe that Libi Noikfi, that perhaps I wasn't as strong as I should have been, and I hope that the end product is something that's going to bring nachas to the Rebbe. And I can't ask the Rebbe if b'diavad, if I did the right thing,
Right.
because it was already in motion. It was kind of already too much already going forward. And the Rebbe could have answered me Askar Alatzian.
Right.
The Rebbe could have said Bracha v'Hatzlacha. The Rebbe actually circled the line Nachas Ruach,
Right.
and made a line.
And he could have also answered that he was upset about it.
Right. The Rebbe is when something is not right, the Rebbe stood up to it.
Right.
And the Rebbe circled the words of Nachas Ruach and made a line to the top of the page, and wrote B'Ravu with 2 exclamation marks.
About the school.
Yeah.
Right. Carmel School.
Yeah. So, is everything and every detail of the school and everything that goes on in the school, is it Beruach Yisrael Saba?
No, Lubavitcher Kanoim would have a lot of problems with this school. Its theories on Zionism are not in alignment with Lubavitch.
Right, that was another issue, of course.
At least back a few years ago. I mean, there were a lot of things. It's not the kind of school that you would set up for Lubavitchers, not by any stretch of the imagination.
And if there was a Lubavitch community, that's not the kind of school that we would practically set up. But given the dynamics of who we had in the community and who the players were,
right,
and what we thought is achievable and what's not achievable, we did the best we can.
Right.
And the Rebbe very much expressed that he was very happy with the result. So, my understanding, to me, the Rebbe was the ultimate Oyev Yisrael. And I personally find it very difficult when some of our people are very critical of other Yidden and Mach, and our little loose on their tongue with the way other people do things.
Right.
Because yes, we are fortunate to have the teachings of the guidance of the Rebbe in the way we do things, but that should be all to the benefit and bolster our Avos Yisrael and acceptance of other people as they are. Not, it shouldn't translate into building an us and them kind of.
Right. Homesick for Lubavitch is brought to you by Yuvla Media, a boutique video production company servicing the Chabad and Jewish community. Since opening 10 years ago, Yuvla Media has pushed the boundaries of artistic and thoughtful storytelling in the community, with an insistence on there always being a memorable story as well as a beautiful and striking visual image that we believe is second to none. Over the years, we have worked with Chabad organizations around the country, as well as large organizations like Boni Olam, Torah Masora, and Atzalathon, guided by the belief that your story is absolutely worth telling with depth and creativity. If you are looking to tell your story with a video, please reach out to us at hello@yuvlamedia.com. Again, that is hello@yuvlamedia.com. A link can be found in the show notes. And now, back to the podcast. I'm thinking now, I actually remember that, when I was, I'm sure you remember this as well from your side of the fence, but, when I was in yeshiva, I actually, I've probably mentioned on the podcast a few times, I was a bit of an extremist in yeshiva. I don't know if I was rebelling against my parents or rebelling against I don't know what, but yeah, I went full bore in yeshiva, and part of that included not so much a open hostility towards what you were doing in the Chabad house, but yeah, whatever. It's not. I mean, it's so silly for me to look back at it, to even think that I thought this way. But, I was so kind of immersed in the world of Lubavitch that, the idea that in your Chabad house, our Chabad house, there was a little bit more kind of openness to other ways of Yiddishkeit. I felt that was a little bit lukewarm, you know what I mean? I thought it was... it wasn't as zealous as it should be, let's say. And again, I'm not defending that point of view. I think it's ridiculous, but that's how I used to think. And I remember very vividly, one of the turning points and a realization that, no, you were right all along about this. I don't think it was just growing up in, everybody recognizes at some point that their parents are smarter than they thought they were. But I remember we lived in Eretz Yisrael for a few months after we were married, and I remember distinctly, like it was yesterday. We were in the shuk on Friday afternoon, and the shuk gets very, very busy, obviously on Friday afternoon. And I remember there was this adorable family business. You could see the father and the son, and maybe there's a grandson there. I think they sold chamutzim, like the pickled stuff and some fish or whatever. One of 10 stores that sold the same thing. Salt of the earth Israelis with the kippah sruga, I didn't get to know them, but I saw them every week. And I remember every week, they would close in the heat of, the shuk still bustling, they closed for Shabbos. And it wasn't like they could have kept Shabbos and kept it open longer, but no, Shabbos is coming, we're closing shop. Maybe it sounds silly, but I remember at the time, I'm like, wait a second, these people are not Lubavitchers. They're not Chassidim. They're most Lubavitchers would not eat in their home, But look at how they are treating Shabbos.
Yeah, their love for Yiddishkeit, their passion.
They're pashat. This is what we describe in Gemara. This is Judaism. And it's not a question anymore. Am I better than them? Or are they better than me? I mean, at that point, I was relatively certain that they were better than me, but that wasn't the question. The question was more, Yiddishkeit is very, very vast. There are many traditions. You can love your own tradition and cherish your own tradition and even prioritize your own tradition and your own heritage without dismissing all the others, right?
Absolutely.
So that is, for whatever it's worth, whatever it means to you, I that was one turning point in my life when I realized, okay, wait a second, maybe my father was right. So, might be rabbi.
No, but one of the one of the Balei Tshuva from Chabad of Hong Kong. You know him well. His name is Rafi Rachamim.
I actually don't know him well. I know of him well. He left.
Yeah.
He left when I was a little boy.
Right.
But he's one of the first Balei Tshuva.
And one of the first Balei Tshuva.
Right.
And he became a Talmud Muvuk of Nissim Peretz.
The Mekubal.
The Mekubal.
The Svardish Mekubal.
Yeah. Zechrenu Levracha.
Was it the parents who came as a chazan? His father?
His father, yes.
I didn't know they.
Yeah,
Okay.
so he passed away, and he had many brachas from the Rebbe, and due to this Rafi Rachamim, hundreds, if not thousands, of Yidden came closer to Yiddishkeit, because he was Meifitz, he was Doilo Mashke Mitoras Rabbi Lacherem.
He became.
Yeah.
But it wasn't his job. He was a
No,
programmer.
he worked for a bank.
Right.
In fact, he's the one who solved the Y2K problem. One of the people who solved the Y2K problem
Yeah.
in the computers.
Right.
He's an absolute genius.
Right. So, wait, one second. So you have to backtrack a little bit. In Hong Kong, when you came, he was one of the people who was not religious. And
Not religious. He was anti-religious.
Anti-religious and living, I guess, with a Chinese.
No.
Oh, he's not.
He was living on his own.
Uh-huh.
You know, and when I invited him to come to a shir, he said, "Dream along.
Uh-huh.
Not interested in your shir, and if I do come to the shir, I'm going to pelt you with questions."
Uh-huh.
And I finally got him to come to the shir, and he asked so many
Who
questions.
was he friends with? Saul Levy?
So Levy, Jay Berger.
All the old timers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
Michal Kalish.
I don't remember him. Okay.
Yeah. So there was a young group of young men and women
Right.
that would come to a shir, and he would ask such aggressive questions at the shir that the people didn't want to deal with this anymore, and they said they're going to start coming to the shir.
Right. They're also Americans, and he's Israeli.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. But in the end of the day, he became full-fledged. Today he's Yid mit a board, and
Yeah.
he lives in Bnei Brak, and so it's not a question of my way or the highway.
Right.
And I think he considers himself very, very much close to Lubavitch.
Right.
And he totally credits that. Ad Yom he calls me Mizman Lizman and asks and is messiahs with me and so on.
Right.
But I very much think that Yiddishkeit is a beautiful mix, a kaleidoscope of amazing minhagim and of many shades and many colors. And I think Chabad has something to offer to each and every one of them, but not necessarily at the price of them giving up and necessarily changing their minhagim.
Right. So I know we're dancing around chronologically here, but I like to focus more on the narrative as opposed to a strict chronology. Let's go back a little bit. You described your parents' different ways of approaching Yiddishkeit in America, coming from Russia. You end up, for one reason or another, we don't have to necessarily go into the details, but you end up, for one reason or another, going to yeshiva in Tels.
Right.
And this probably also plays a role in this whole... Most Lubavitchers don't get that kind of exposure.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that. I don't talk about exactly why and how. Well, I mean, all your brothers ended up in Tels.
Most of them. Yeah.
At least for a few years. And you all ended up coming back.
Right.
So what was that like?
Look, initially we were extremely welcome there.
In Tels.
And
which Tels was it? Cleveland?
It was in Chicago.
Chicago. There's two,
yeah,
right?
And the reason it was Telshe Chicago is because the Rosh Yeshiva of Telshe Chicago was a son of one of the senior rabbonim in Detroit, so he knew our family, and he was very close to our family, and for a number of reasons which we won't go into right now, it was not all that practical for my parents to send children to New York,
right,
which was far away in those times, and financial and other considerations and so on.
Right. And we're talking about Yeshiva Ketana, right?
Yeah.
High school.
Yeah.
Right.
And we were close to home.
Right.
And of course, they tried to pump us that we would become Gedolei Yisrael, and that we had the capacity to be big Rosh Yeshivas and Gaonim,
Right.
and so on and so forth. But all in all, it was mostly a positive kind of experience.
But describe what was that like growing up as a Lubavitcher boy, surrounded by non-Lubavitchers?
Again, you're still talking about out of town.
No, I'm not talking about like the snagdus and the fighting. I'm more thinking about like, you feel out of place.
No, we did not feel out of place at all.
So it's just we're sitting here learning Torah and that's it.
Yeah, we're here to learn Torah, and in Chicago, I remember we used to go.
So you wore your black hat. I mean, did everyone wear a black hat in those days?
Well, most of the people did.
Litvish also wore black hats.
Yeah. But we would go to the Kosofsky's house in Chicago,
Right.
and we would join the hookups.
To the Fabranians.
Yeah, and that's when we would have to sometimes deal with some issues of the school because we would be up till 2-3 o'clock in the morning listening to the Rebbe's Fabringen.
So Bittul Torah.
So Bittul Torah, and if we came a little bit late to Shachris in the morning, it was a little bit of an issue to deal with.
I mean, they knew you were Lubavitchers, though, right?
Yeah.
And they were okay with that.
And they were absolutely okay with it.
Was there a, looking back, was there a certain, maybe in a way the more interesting thing to me is when you leave Tels, you're there for 3 years?
Yeah.
And you end up going to where you probably always expected to go, which was to...
I went to Morristown.
Right, but to Lubavitch Yeshivas. Was there something that you understood about that world that your friends did not understand?
Oh, 100%. But it's not only from going there.
Right.
It was from growing up in Detroit.
Right.
And very much being part of the community.
Right.
And not, and not establishing ourselves that we are Chabad.
Right.
And this is our way, and our way is the right way. Right.
Right.
If you want to be respected, earn that credit.
Right.
Earn that respect.
Right.
And I think a lot of people became very niskarv to Chabad, both my father's way of bringing to Kislev, he would make a chalukas hashas and so on, and his mesiras nefesh on Chol Yisrael, and his mesiras going to the mikveh, and his mesiras nefesh davening, mamash b'mitzvah halev. People used to come by our house on Shabbos afternoon and listen from outside to my father davening.
He would come back home and daven.
He would come back home and daven. He would be by Baruch Shomer, having gotten up, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and going to the mikveh and saying korbanos and Psukei de Zimra. He would come home having heard Kriyas HaTorah, and maybe get up to Baruch Shomer. He would come home and he would have one of us make kiddush for my mother, and the girls in the family, and he would daven, and he would sit down and daven from Baruch Shomer till after Musaf. Would take him an hour and a half to 2 hours, and his talis would be drenched on a cold winter day.
Literally.
This is not the figment of my imagination. He would daven and pour his heart out. And people would hear, there would be people standing because we lived on a corner street. People would be standing in front of our house and on the side of our house and listening to Rabbi Mordechai Avtzon davening.
So he just led by example.
Yeah, but he didn't, of course he was very outspoken about the Rebbe and so on, but he was primarily, he was respected for who he was, and for being as genuine as he was.
Right. While
my mother was respected for her absolute commitment to helping Yidden in the way that they needed help the most.
So
and be focused on their needs.
What you're describing to me is that.
So my father was more focused on what he thought Yidden should want, and my mother was more focused on what do they need today.
I understand. No, but I'm saying the general theme that you're giving me here is that because your parents ended up in Detroit and not in, even a smaller Lubavitch community like Montreal, or I don't know what else was there. But, I mean, obviously Crown Heights, but most people didn't end up in Crown Heights. In Europe or whatever it was, they were literally one of a few Lubavitchers in Detroit, right?
At one point, I think the only ones.
The only ones. So there was a sense, and this is something that I discuss on the podcast. One of my favorite conversations with Rabbi Seligson about his father, Dr. Seligson,
Right.
Because his father grew up also as in the only Lubavitch family in the entire town of Krakow, I think it was, right? Or one of the big cities of Poland, one of the big Jewish communities of Poland. They were the only Lubavitch family, and that does change your viewpoint, right? Like you cannot operate from you're not operating from a strength in numbers place, right? You are in the minority. You are firmly in the minority, and so in political terms, you're like, okay, so how do I strategize to somehow leverage? That's not the point here. The point here is you really have to ask yourself, if I'm in the minority, how do I reconcile my own identity, my own heritage, with the fact that everyone around me is not like me? It asks a set of questions that isn't asked when everyone around you looks exactly like you.
Right.
Right, and you have to.
Sure, makes you more aware of yourself.
Right, and also asks you if the reason, the reason that you are who you are is not simply answered because everyone around me is like this too. There's a different reason. There has to be a different reason, right? And it's interesting the way you're describing it to me, that, the way your parents were in Detroit and then being in Gateshead, and then obviously that's how, I understood the way you operated the Chabad house in Hong Kong. It's very interesting. In a way, yeah, maybe some people see it differently, but they also have different upbringing. So there are different ways of approaching it, right? Based on where you come from, you see things differently. It's not even necessarily a debate of who's right and who's wrong. It's just that there are different approaches, right? And it depends on how you on where you're coming from and how you're going to see it, right? So you grow up in Detroit, you go to Gateshead, then to Morristown, then you
not to Gateshead to
not Gateshead, to Telshe Chicago, then Morristown, to Melech.
Yeah.
So he was your first official mashpia.
Oh yeah, and that was an amazing experience.
And you spent how long with him?
Unfortunately, only a year, because I was sent to shlichus in Venezuela, once upon a country.
Yeah. 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 So Melech was,
That said, there's still a shluchim there, and there still is a small community, but it's a shadow of what it was.
Right. On every level.
Yeah.
So obviously, I know your story already, but so Melech ends up being your only mashpia, really, like in an official capacity.
Right.
Yeah. So what was he like? And what was it like to meet someone like that? After, like, again, I think it's interesting. You're this bacher who's coming from a world that most of your friends aren't aware of. How did you appreciate this Melech character?
I appreciated it because while they don't have chassidus in a Litvish yeshiva, they do have Musar and Hashkafa.
Right.
And when you meet someone like Reb Melech, who is an absolute bor sut she'enema b'tipa, and just a giant of both in Nigla and Chassidus,
right,
and a person with such clarity it was like wow.
Right.
It was like just standing there, like you felt like you were standing next to a mountain. When you heard one upbringing from him, or even one shlichus,
Right.
and you could see that like Ruma ben Benila ben Chami, it was just like it was a different world. It's not even in the same league.
Right.
So I had a tremendous respect for Reb Melech,
Right.
and I stayed in touch with him for a number of years. And unfortunately, being so far wasn't so easy. But whenever I would see him, he would be Messiachas in a very warm way. Even though he was considered by many people as being a little bit aloof, I didn't find him that way at all.
You didn't find him aloof.
No. He genuinely asked how we're doing and how we're managing and how things are going. And I found him to be a very incredible person.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly his mind was also b'muskoles. It was a tremendous muscle, but it didn't detract from his relationship with the individual at all. I didn't find it that way at all.
So let me backtrack 1 second to when you were in Tels. So when you were in Tels, would you come in at all to Fabringen? To you come into 7 you came for Tishrei to 7
I would come every Tishrei for 7
the entire Tishrei.
Yeah.
Your father came also.
Yeah, well, we were all from yeshiva.
Right.
And my father had Mesiras Nefesh in those days to take all the boys for Simchas Torah.
Just for Simchas Torah.
Yeah, every single year.
So not the whole Tishrei.
Not the whole Tishrei, no.
So you all came from yeshiva for Simchas Torah, or you went home for Tishrei?
No, we went home for Tishrei.
And then Simchas Torah, you all came to New York.
Right.
Where did you stay?
We used to stay by Rebbe Chaim Reutblatt. We used to stay by the Chitrix. We used to stay by the Gansbergs on Eastern Parkway.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually some of my sisters
Got
married, so we started staying by them.
And you would you come in at other times of the year also?
Generally not.
No. What was it like to what was it like to come into 770 from you're coming from a Telshe yeshiva?
Yeah, but we were raised Chabad, and
I know, but you don't know anybody else, right? Like you're not.
Yeah, so till today I struggle with that because a lot of people come over to me, and they know who I am, for one reason or another, and I'm kind of like I might know you, but I can't put a face to a name necessarily,
Right.
because I didn't have a kita here.
You're an outsider.
So I was kind of an outsider.
Who did you hang out with when you came for Simchas Torah? Just your brothers?
Yeah, and our hosts. We also stayed one or a couple of years by Chaim Baruch Halberstam.
Right.
I don't know what my parents' relationship with them was, but we stayed there. So, and Bichlal, it was it was to me, it was very, very warm memories from coming to the Rebbe for Simchas Torah was.
No, I'm sure, but I'm asking more like on a ground level,
Yeah. So I know very few people. Like the other day, I was at a simcha,
right,
and out of a crowd of a couple hundred people, maybe I could name 10 or 20 of them.
Right.
Because
I mean, effectively, you were only in the Lubavitch yeshiva system for 1 year.
Right.
And you were in 770 at all? After shlichus in Venezuela?
After shlichus in Venezuela, which extended from 2 years to 3 years, and then the standard was 2 years.
Right.
I stayed for 3 years. I came back to 770, and I was very close with the Rosh Yeshiva, Olav Shalom, Rav Pekarsky.
Right.
And he worked out a Seder Limud for my Chavrusa and myself. And then the famous story of my life that Rabbi Grumblat Zolzangezon came to me and asked me to be a teacher in the Mesivta.
Right. In Buenos Aires.
In Buenos Aires, because I speak Spanish. And I told him that I just came back from 3 years of shlichus and I had no intention of going anywhere.
Right.
So he says, "So why don't you write to the Rebbe?" I said, "Well, why should you write to the Rebbe? There's no question to ask."
Right.
So he said, "So how about just writing to the Rebbe that you were requested to come and you have no."
It's not nice what he did, but
Uh-huh.
I love Rabbi Grumblat, but not nice what he did.
I love him as well.
There's no way he would have done that. If he was in your shoes, he would not have gone.
Anyway, so he said, so it's a whole interesting story. I don't know if to go into all the details. We got a very puzzling answer from the Rebbe in the beginning, and he insisted that he write to the Rebbe and explain what's going on in Buenos Aires.
Right.
And eventually I went there, and that opened up a very interesting chapter in my life. Firstly, I had a very nice kit of Talmidim, and I was very given to them for a year. But in the evenings and sometimes in the mornings, a lot of Baalei Tshuva would come to Chabad house then, which was on Asquenega.
Are you shaking your leg?
Was I? Didn't.
Yeah.
So I saw that these people were struggling. They were opening up a siddur and they were davening in Spanish. And looked at the siddur. It looked like a very strange siddur to me. I was not familiar with that siddur.
Right.
So I spoke to Rabbi Grumblat, and I said, "What's the siddur that they're using?" He's saying they're using a siddur that was written by a Reform rabbi. It's the only siddur available. I said, "So we have to make a siddur that's appropriate for them." He says, "But how can I do that now? We're struggling to pay the malamdim. We're struggling to keep just al rishonim on mitzdarim, and you're bringing new projects." So at that time, I took on a crazy commitment that I would raise the money for the siddur in Spanish. And together with his brother, Reb Nosson Grumblat, we gave out the siddur. And that started a whole new, that struck a fire inside me about davening. I suppose I yarshened that from my father a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, I've had a very strong interest in making davening meaningful and accessible and relatable to people. So I have a beautiful story that I'd like to share.
Sure.
About the siddur. It was a jewelry fair in Hong Kong, and it was Friday night. We had many guests at Chabad house, as we always do, especially at a fair. And one Yid from Buenos Aires, and he told me I should tell the story and I should use his name. His name is Daniel Bilavsky. Comes over to me and he says to me, "Rabbi, I just came here to say thank you to you." I said, "Thank you for what?" And he opens the siddur, which has my name in it as one of the co-authors of the of this project, together with Nosson Grumblat and a cousin of theirs who did the original translation from English. We edited it back from the Lashon Kodesh. And he said, "This has changed my life. The siddur is with me 24/7. The only place it doesn't go with me is when I take a shower or I use the washroom."
The Spanish siddur.
The Spanish siddur. And he knew it by heart already. He says, "But I like to read it inside in Spanish." And he would say the whole daven. He knew the whole siddur by heart in Spanish.
In Spanish.
Yeah. So I said, "Listen, that's. I feel it's an honor to be of service, and thank you for the very, very positive feedback." A little while later, after the first course, he comes over to me and he says, "I'm saying goodbye tonight because I'm very tired. I'm very jet lagged, and I'm not sure if I'm going to make it tomorrow morning." And he has a siddur under his arm. In those days, there was no Erev in Hong Kong. Now there is. So I said, "Where are you taking that siddur?" He says, "I'm taking it with me to my hotel." I said, "But you're not supposed to carry on Shabbos." He says, "Yeah, I'm not a full Baal Tshuva yet. I still do certain things, but I daven 3 times a day, and I say Moeda'ani from the Siddur, and I say Al-Mapil from the Siddur, and I say Shema Yisrael at night and in the morning from the Siddur, everything from the Siddur. Everything is read out of the Siddur. So I said, but maybe you should keep it here because you're davening to Hashem, and the same God says that you're not supposed to carry on Shabbos. He says, I need 5 minutes to think about this. He goes over to a corner, and he thinks about it, comes back to me, and he says, I decided I'm taking the Siddur, and Hashem will understand me. Because imagine if you asked me to leave my left leg or my left arm here. Would you ask me to do a thing like that? No, that's part of who I am. So just like my legs go to the hotel, my arms go with me. Or even the jacket that I'm wearing. You're going to tell me to leave my jacket? That's my clothing. Siddur to me is more than clothing. So I said, I fully understand you, and I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I can just tell you that since you mentioned to me that you're grateful to me for being involved in the Siddur and for making it available, I did this with the intention of people getting closer to Torah and mitzvahs, and one of the things of Torah and mitzvahs is that we don't carry on Shabbos.
Right.
He says, I need another 5 minutes to think about it. Literally. He comes back to me after 5 minutes, and I see he's caressing the Siddur. He's like going like this and caressing the Siddur and holding it fondly. And he comes and he gives it to me, and he says to me in Spanish, Lo dejo en buenas manos, which means I leave it in good hands. And my hand was here on the top of the Siddur, holding the Siddur, and he burst out crying. And I still feel adayom, those hot tears,
Really?
falling on the back of my hand. And I thought to myself, Ribbono shel olam, where is he when it comes to Avodas Hashem?
Right.
And where am I? I said, this guy is way ahead of me. He's like in a different world altogether.
Right.
If I'm in Asiya, he's at least in Bria,
Right.
or who knows where he is. And this has inspired me to take this further. And as a result of that, I'm very involved now with, as you know, and as you've collaborated in this project, Siddur in English, to make it much more relatable,
Right.
and understandable and enjoyable to daven, because there's no mitzvah that we call on people and we call on ourselves and on other people to do as often as davening, and people find davening a struggle.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it sounds foreign, or it sounds antiquated, and
Or sometimes, in a way even worse, is it doesn't sound like anything at all. If you just read the Hebrew, even if you know the translation, I think I had this discussion with someone else on a different podcast. But you take the typical yeshiva bacher and have him talk, have him read the English translation of davening. I think he would go crazy. Like it's Hebrew kind of gives you like a buffer to like, okay, this is, you sing it like Tehillim, you know what I mean? Like, it's, even if I know what it means, it's okay.
These are the words that David HaMelech davened in.
Yeah, it's not my words, it's his words. Whatever, okay, it's a nice idea. But when you start saying it in your own language, it's like, wait a second, praise, any pasuk pretty much. Every single day I will bless you and I will sing your name forever and ever. Who talks like that, right? What does that even mean? And do I really think that for a second? Do I really, that sounds a little bit kooky, right? And so you have to start really, really coming to terms with what you're saying, and I think that's one of the reasons to so I think on that podcast, I suggested that it wouldn't be a bad idea for yeshivas to daven in English. It's not going to happen, but I think it would force like a reckoning. Like people would get more honest with what they're saying and what they're working with. Right, the whole idea, if you think about it, like you open up a mimer in Torah, Likutei Torah, and very often the mimer is a beer on Pirush Milas. It's a Nuvart and what Pesukei de Zimra is and what this pasuk in Ashrei means and so on. And what is that? It's Alter Rebbe trying to explain what's the idea behind this really in some sense over the top pasuk. Like, well, what's it saying? Machus klei elamim. What does that mean? It's a whole thing about say the shtalshlus. It means a lot. Turns out,
Correct.
Right? I mean, that's the idea of Chassidus, is to try to, one of the ideas of Chassidus is to try to kind of come to terms with these grandiose, sweeping statements and understand the enormity of what they are. Right? I mean, on one hand, Pirush Milas, the simplicity, and even Spal al Dazatinik is the lashon, I think, right? But you also, these words are not simple words at all, and they carry enormity. And there's this kind of disconnect where people, and it's not just davening. Davening is like the gateway to this disconnect, because then it just feeds, it just keeps on going. Where people talk in Chassidish language and just their hergeshim and everything. Once you allow for, the same, lahavdil elf havdalas, right? What's the whole idea of nivel peh, right? What's the problem with nivel peh? Once you allow your mouth to speak a certain way, in a negative way in that case, you have now schlepped yourself to a certain, you have allowed yourself to be schlepped into a different context, which is a very negative, debasing, coarse context.
Correct.
Right? I'm not immune from it personally. I'm not trying to make believe like I stand higher than that, but that is a problem with it. The same thing can be said lahavdil the other way, where you get schlepped into a holy context that you have no footing in, and you just end up, groping in the heavens, and there's a lashon for it that's eluding me now, but like people that are, tinkering up high and playing games, it's not healthy either.
Right. In Yiddish, there's an expression, krichen auf gleiche Wend.
Right. Maybe that's what I'm thinking about. But there's I think there would be some, like I think sometimes, imagine if in Old Torah, for example, the base medrash with 250 bracha, how many bracha there are, like a bracha would get up from mincha and say Asher in English, like the Chazan, and then Chazar Zashatz in English. I think it would be pretty cool. I think it would really force a reckoning for a lot of Bachrim.
Right. And some.
Blessed are you, our God, the God of our fathers, God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, God of Yaakov, etc., etc. It's like, wait a second, what are we saying here? Like, this is the language we use when we're talking. Language is a very important thing, right? The words that we use are a very important thing. And how we use words, and what words can mean, and how we can form words into a sentence. This is a big part of how we think about the world. So, yeah. Anyway.
So when tefillah is not accomplishing a chibur,
right,
then you know that you have a problem.
Right.
And to do this mitzvah several times a day,
right,
it's actually alienating. And how did I know how important it is? Another nice anecdotal story, a short story. I get a call from a shliach in Tokyo,
right,
Rabbi Mendel Sudakevich. And he says, a friend of mine, David, is coming to Hong Kong. Look after him. So we became very good friends. And he asked me after a couple of days if he can speak to me. And I saw that he was very agitated. And he said, Rabbi, I took it upon myself. I made a hachlata a year or two ago to daven 3 times a day. and I'm about to give it up. Because every time I daven, I actually get more frustrated because I daven in English, and it just doesn't. It's not relatable.
Right.
So I said to him, I had just started working on the Siddur at the time, and I had Shemon Esrei in a very rough word draft.
Right.
I said, it hasn't even gone through a first edit, but if you can make your way through all those imperfections and just daven from that, he said, sure. He took the papers, came back about 45 minutes later. His face was red from tears.
Really?
He says, Rabbi, you don't know what you did. I just davened for the first time in my life.
Huh.
So I people who know me know that I'm very involved in this, and that I'm working
On the English translation.
on an English translation, and hopefully one day maybe circle back to Spanish as well.
Uh-huh.
But to me, we know that the avodah b'zman hazeh is in davening even over Torah,
Right.
and it's critical that people should actually look forward to davening, because that's a vital organ of Yiddishkeit, and one that is, that people are busier saying rather than actually experiencing. And it's unfortunate that we don't, that when we come to daven, where we find that we have so much to say that we're kind of feel rushed, and we go through it, and then feel even more unaccomplished.
Right.
So it's.
I mean, that in that sense, that's been true since the beginning of time. It seems. But at least when you get to it, it should mean something.
Yeah.
But I want to. We're not going to cover the whole story of Chabad of Hong Kong here, but I don't want to end without getting there somehow. So you were in Samsandi for a little bit until you were pulled to Argentina, and then.
And then I got very involved in the Siddur project.
Right.
So I was working for Argentina, but based in America.
So you came back to America to work on the Siddur.
To work on the Siddur.
Uh-huh.
And to raise funds for the Siddur and so
Right.
on and so forth. In those days, it was very expensive. You didn't have it, couldn't do it on your laptop.
You're saying just for the typesetting was expensive.
Typesetting was very, very expensive.
Sure.
And then a letter came to the Rebbe, which apparently went to many other organizations, but the Rebbe was the only one who answered it. It was an SOS letter: "Save our shul, save our synagogue."
Amamish, they put "Save Our Shul"?
I believe so.
Uh-huh.
And the late David Buxbaum was on that committee. It was chaired by Mark Eilenberg, which is a name you might remember.
I remember David Buxbaum.
And David Darwish.
I remember that name too.
Yeah.
For other reasons.
Yeah, and there were several other people there, and they begged.
I thought it was for Michael Green's son's bar mitzvah.
No.
That's not what it was.
No.
It just happened to be in that time.
Yeah, it happened to be at that time.
There were a few people that were traditional Jews on some level.
Right.
And they wanted some kind of rav.
Right, and they wanted some genuine leadership.
But they were open to reform also, weren't they?
Not the committee. The religious committee wanted the Dafka Orthodox.
So who did they reach out to? Chabad, OU?
The OU. I think they sent also to conservative as well, but to OU, to NCSY, to Young Israel.
And those people weren't going to send anybody to Hong Kong. They had no money then either. It was the shul in Hong Kong had no money.
Exactly. But the Rebbe took a very strong interest.
Had there been Merkez Shluchim in Hong Kong beforehand? Had there ever been?
I think they were on one or two occasions on the way to someplace, either on the way to India or on the way maybe to Australia.
Look, I just think it's important to describe how out there it was. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, but today the whole world geographically has shrunk, right? In the sense that you could get there in 16 hours. But that's not even the bigger. You could be connected on the phone you can download Hong Kong on Google Maps and see everything what's going on.
Right.
But in those days, I mean, you're talking about like South Argentina, as far as it is from New York. Argentina had a sizable Jewish community.
Very much so.
Well, by the time you got there,
Right.
like when Rabbi Beryl Baumgarten came and Rabbi Ziegenblatt was growing up, it was a lot of Yidden there, but not so many religious Jews.
Right.
But by the time, but even when Rabbi Baumgarten came, there were a few shuls from Yidden that lived there. There were less Rabbanim, but there were a few shuls, right?
Right.
Like, and so on. Australia was very far away, but there was a community. Hong Kong was literally...
And it didn't have an indigenous community.
Nothing.
Argentina, the Jewish community was indigenous in the sense that they were Argentinians. They were Argentinian
For a few
passport
generations
holders.
already, yeah.
Right.
Right.
And they were, you're talking about in the hundreds of thousands, right?
Right. And they weren't going anywhere.
They were Argentinians.
Right.
Here it was like coming, like, what are you coming here for? Who are you coming for?
You're saying the Yidden not that they were natives for generations. They were all expats.
Right. The only community that had an indigenous native community was Singapore.
I mean, they weren't. Singapore itself was a relatively new country. I mean, people that felt citizens, local.
Yeah, but I'm saying that their children were, they were subject to the draft of the army.
I see, like citizens of their country.
Citizens of their country. Here in Hong Kong, in those days, the average Jew came for 3 to 4 years.
Well, not only that, they'd been kicked out just before that during the war, weren't they? Didn't the Japanese kick them out, or the Japanese kicked them out of China? No, they kicked them out of Hong Kong, didn't they?
Well, people, I don't know if they were kicked out, but they definitely left.
The Sassoons and the Kaduris, they escaped, didn't they, from Hong Kong? Yeah.
Right. So Hong Kong was like people who admired Chabad and who were, let's say, on business in Hong Kong, like wondered, like they used to joke with me, what did you do wrong that the Rebbe sent you so far away?
They used to joke. You thought it was funny? It doesn't sound like much of a joke.
I didn't think it was funny either, but they meant it in a lighthearted way. They didn't mean it in a way.
Okay, but just to clarify for those who don't know, you first went as an American shliach, as a bacher.
I went as a bacher with another bacher.
Right.
And that bacher did a shliach.
So originally you went for what, a couple months?
I went for a month.
The two of you went for a month.
For a month, and after the month was already Rosh Chodesh Nisan.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked if we could stay for Pesach.
Right.
But the bacher that went with me, today he's a shliach in New Jersey, in Wayne, New Jersey.
Right.
Michael Gurka was committed to going back for a shidduch.
Right.
And he was not able to stay. So they asked me if I could stay alone. I said, if I could maybe ask a brother of mine to come or another friend to come. No, there's no budget for it.
That's why you were alone.
Yeah.
They were refused to pay for another trip.
Yeah, it was a community that was completely broke, and there was no.
I mean, there was plenty of money. But
well, yeah, but the community itself
right.
didn't have funds.
Right, the people who were talking to you.
And they said no, we want you to stay on your own. I said, but I'm not going to make a seder with a treif kitchen, because the kitchen was treif at the time in the JCC. So after a very, very long discussion, firstly I called up the Rebbe's office, the Maskiras, and Rabbi Chadakov.
Well, one second. Why did you agree yourself to stay?
I didn't. I said I would ask. Because I was sure that the answer would be no.
Why did you have to ask? You came for a month. You could go back home.
I could have.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kasha v'maisa. Probably I felt the pressure.
Right.
And
you were there already. You saw what they needed.
And I was there and saw what they needed, and I saw that they're willing to at least make the place kosher for Pesach.
Right.
And it was an interesting deal. You could make it kosher for Pesach on condition that it goes back to treif the day after Pesach.
That was the deal you made with them.
That was the deal that was the condition that they gave me.
That you can kasher for Pesach on the condition that you treif it up the day after.
Yeah. Not that I treif it up,
but you let them treif it up.
Yeah, that I don't get involved in the kitchen operation.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's just so much to tell about that story, but I don't think there's time for it. But bottom line is that we had a seder with 150 people, first time kosher in who knows how many years.
Where did you get the kosher food from?
We at that time there was one year that was importing a little bit of meat, and Bernie Newmark Olav Shalom was helping the community to get meat. So maybe it was mostly fish. I can't even remember the details of it, but I remember that we had a kosher Pesach, and in my
And matzahs you got from where?
and matzahs were flown in from probably from America. Various businessmen brought matzahs. I'm sure most of the people ate probably machine matzahs that they would bring in there, but we had, of course, hand matzahs for those who wanted it. And I was so excited about it that at the end of the Seder, I announced that there would be a minyan on Shvi Shel Pesach. No one ever heard of that Yom Tov. It was a kind of Yom Tov a week after Pesach. Pesach is over after the night. The minute the Seder is over.
Right.
So I came to the shul, and the shul was locked.
Right.
And I'm looking around. Maybe I can go. Maybe one of the windows is open. Maybe one of the side doors is open, and it's locked. The gardener sees me, and he says in his Chinese accent, he says, "Mr. Labai, what you looking for?"
Right.
I said, "I'm going to the shul. I want to go into the synagogue." He says, "Don't you know it's closed in honor of the Jewish holiday?"
But one second, you skipped something. So you wrote into the Maskiris about staying.
I called up Rabbi Chadakov,
and
he said he would get back to me,
and
that Rebbe instructed me to stay.
So Chadakov got back to you
Yeah.
and said that was said to stay.
Yeah.
Indefinitely.
No, to stay for Yom Tov.
Uh-huh.
To help to make Yom Tov.
Okay, that's 40 years ago.
That's 40 years ago.
No.
And but then after Yom Tov was over, they asked me if I could come back for a bar mitzvah, another bar mitzvah.
Oh, so you went back to America
There was
after
a family
Pesach?
Called Tucker.
You came back to America after Pesach?
I came back to America after Pesach.
And they asked you to come back?
They asked me to come back for a bar mitzvah sometime during Sfira. And I came back. And then they asked me to come back for Shavuos, and I said I could do it if they would let me, make some kind of publicity of Saras HaDibros and invite, and we would get kids to come to the shul and so on and so forth. And one of the people of the board banged on the table and he said, "Point of order, this is not a Chabad shul." I said, so what's the problem? He said, "We don't have the minhag of inviting children to hear the Saras HaDibros. And this is not a Chabad shul. I object." I said, "Okay, I thank you very much for crediting Chabad to encourage Jewish children to listen to the Saras HaDibros. What could be wrong with that?"
Right.
Anyway, bottom line is that while there was a lot of antagonism to a religious person coming, the religious committee pushed forward and asked me to come for a year,
right,
to sign a contract for a year, and I was very reluctant because I'm a Bachar and what am I doing alone in a place like Hong Kong?
Right.
And that's a very, very lengthy story, but the upshot of it is
for episode 2.
That's for another episode, yeah. But the bottom line is that Rebbe gave a bracha for me to stay there, and several months, and later on, around right after Hanukkah, I came back to America, and I met Mommy,
right,
your mother. And then I went back to Hong Kong again,
right,
and came back several weeks later, and we got married.
You went in between engagement
and a wedding, which
why,
the whole engagement was all of 7 weeks.
Why did you have to go to Hong Kong in between?
Oh, don't ask. Because people were complaining that if I wasn't there, that the
contract will lapse.
The contract will lapse, or the kitchen will lapse, and it won't be kosher. Because by then they allowed us to make the kitchen kosher full time.
Uh-huh.
And then we got married, and 3 weeks after our wedding, we went to Hong Kong.
Supposedly to finish up a contract.
Supposedly to finish up a contract.
Yeah, but deep down you knew it was going to be for
No,
longer.
no. Really, I thought it was because to me, I saw my future more with Latin America and so on.
Latin America,
Yeah.
in Argentina.
Maybe Argentina, maybe other countries,
Right.
but I understood the Latin mentality very well,
Right. It's a very good people down there.
and very warm
Yes.
people and caring
Yes.
and heartsiddick mention. And to me, I didn't have a worry at all
Right.
about what I could get involved in.
So you thought Hong Kong was to finish up and
Yeah, I thought just to help them get on track, and
someone else will pick up the
yeah,
slack.
yeah. But
Huh.
they wish they had other things in mind.
Yeah, that is a whole different story.
Yeah.
Huh. Trying to think how to wrap it up, if it needs to be wrapped up at all.
Okay.
So, like we said at the beginning, it's approaching 40 years. It's approaching 40 years. What would you say, looking back at 40 years? I mean, trying to trying to pitch the question in a way that it doesn't lead to doesn't demand an hour answer. What would you say is your proudest accomplishment of the 40 years? How do you look back at the 40 years? How do you I don't know, is that a fair question to ask? Or is it too broad?
No, it's a big question to ask,
Right.
and to say what is the proudest accomplishment. I think there are a number of them, but some of them we discussed already this evening, and that is that it really became a model of Chabad interacting with the wide spectrum of Yiddishkeit in a very meaningful way, and I hope that we made a contribution to that in a meaningful way. And I would like to think as well that the vision of the Rebbe to go to Asia at that time, before it was what it is today,
Right.
was just incredible, and to be entrusted to be the pioneer shliach in that part of the world is I don't even know what the word in English would be, but is more than an honor. And there's clearly today it's Asia is a place where people come back very, very bolstered and strengthened in their Yiddishkeit. Today, even in the post-COVID world, there could be at Chabad houses throughout Asia on a Friday night, could be several thousand people. Many of them experiencing Shabbos for the first time. I remember one time we had in Hong Kong where we never, we didn't have ever 1,000 people for a Shabbos, but we had nice crowds, and we would go around the table, and somebody from Israel said, I traveled now to New Zealand, and I traveled to Australia, and I traveled to some of the islands in the Pacific, and I'm on my way back to Israel. He says, and I came to Chabad of Hong Kong, and I found something that I am importing to Israel, and that is genuine Avos Yisrael. So because we need it desperately over there. So I think the fact that we always try to make people feel that they're special in their own way is, of course that could happen anywheres, but the mere fact that so many people converge on Hong Kong or converge on Asia is, we set we have a beautiful group of shluchim there that really
Right.
support one another. And I'm very, very, very grateful for the opportunity to have been part of that.
Yeah. So while you're talking, I was thinking about two things. One thing is, yes, there was something growing up. I'm not, I'm not trying to sugarcoat or, go over the top with it, but to me, especially looking back, and I don't say it's to the exclusion of anyone else, but it's more to the exclusion of it being discussed more, or maybe in my own mind it was something I didn't pay attention to enough growing up. A lot of the people that came to the Chabad house in Hong Kong were from Eden. There were businessmen coming, from Eden coming for business. There was no there was no incentive that you're going to carve them and make them from Eden. They're from already, and they're going home after. A lot of them, some of them, of course, were well off and possible supporters and donors. A lot of them were not. I grew up seeing you welcome them into the shul and welcome them in for a meal, equally, regardless of if they needed, if they offered an opportunity to be makar of them, or whether they offered an opportunity to become supporters. They were welcomed equally. And that's a true testament to Ahavas Yisrael. That's what it was about. That's what it was about. That was something that I grew up watching. Maybe for some people it's not a surprise at all, but I did not, growing up, I'd never ever heard of anybody in the shul being, from you, I never heard anybody being defined by if they had money or didn't have money, if they could support or not support. That was not a thing. And if I took it for granted when I was younger, I don't take it for granted today. And I think that's a very important thing to point out. But to wrap up the conversation, because I have a habit of trying to do that. But to me, there's an interesting bookend here where you talk about your parents coming to the American Midwest as refugees, immigrants, and finding themselves as from the handful of from Eden, fending, together with the cobbled together motley crew of other from Eden for Yiddishkeit in Detroit, and the only Lubavitchers for a time fighting for their kids' Chassidische Chinuch at the time. That forced them, and that forced you when you grew up, to ask a series of questions about who you were. But it also offers, that's the pressure of it, but it also offers an opportunity to discover something that otherwise wouldn't be discovered, that you would take for granted if you just had everyone around you looking like you. In many ways, if you try to define what Asia is, and like on a conceptual level, obviously geographically Asia is where it is, but what does Asia mean for the Jewish people in the past 40 years? What does Asia signify? Asia is a place that people come for, mostly for business opportunity. Of course, there's a segment that comes for the Israelis that come for tiyul, for for tourism.
Mm.
But I would say mostly Asia is about people coming for to what's the word, to chart a new course, to make their fortune, right? Either if they move there or if they come from time to time, they're seeking out opportunity, and that's what draws them there. But when they find themselves there, they realize that suddenly they are not surrounded by their regular environments. They're not surrounded by people who look like them or think like them and behave like them, right?
Right.
Suddenly, especially people that move there to live there, suddenly, because I saw it growing up in Hong Kong all the time. I mean, of course, you saw it. You'd have these Israelis who were secular Israelis who they told us all the time, if we lived in Israel, we would never talk to each other. We would never talk to a religious rabbi. There's no way in the world. No way in the world. In Israel, we would talk to a rabbi with a beard. No way in the world. But in Hong Kong, we don't have a choice. No one else to talk to, right? And not only that, you come to Hong Kong and suddenly you're surrounded by people that don't look like you, and you're like, wait, I'm Jewish. And if I'm Jewish, I have something in common with this rabbi, even if in Israel I would say I don't.
Correct.
Right? So it's interesting that how things in a way come full circle. How that identity that I wouldn't call it survivor's identity, but that very independent spirit identity, or that identity that comes from the independent spirit that you described in your parents growing up in Detroit, comes full circle. That ultimately is what Asia is also for many people. It's a place where people are in the minority, they're on their own, and they have to ask some really important questions about who they are. And the good thing about those questions is it provokes and leads to very original and new and inspired answers.
Right. And we have to remember at all times that it's not by mistake that when they have introduced the Mivtzoim,
Right.
that the first and leading Mivtza is Avos Yisrael.
Right.
If there isn't Avos Yisrael in a genuine way, like Reb Mendel Futefas, our great uncle, would say all the time, Mivtza Avos Yisrael doesn't mean to behave as if you have Avos Yisrael. Mivtza Avos Yisrael, or as he called it back from the times of the Rebbe Rashab, Avos Reim,
Right.
is to taka lib Yidden,
Right.
and to find the positive in them and make them feel good about who they are, how they are, and with what they are. And without that, everything else gets watered down.
Right.
That's the electricity of Chabad.
Right.
And when you're dealing with a shlichus, that a significant component of it is Yidden that already have their own derech, or feel or even believe that they have their own derech, you're there to make them feel good about that, not to highlight why your way is better than theirs,
Right.
but just to make them feel good about it, and that has a much more positive impact on them than highlighting why our way is superior, or why things should be dafka our way. So we adopted a gang, a mahalach in Hong Kong, as you mentioned earlier, that we wanted everybody to be able to celebrate their traditions, and that's why we even have on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have what everybody calls, maybe it sounds a little funny on the podcast, but it's called an Ashkefardi service.
Right.
And it's a very unique experience, because it reminds us that we could have very, very distinct minhagim, but if we have real Avos Yisrael, we don't have to go each our own way on such important days like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We can find commonality, and that's I think one of the strongest messages that Chabad of Hong Kong has sent out.
Right. Right. I mean, ultimately, if the argument is that Chassidus is for all Yidden, it's a small-minded argument to say that that's because all Yidden are going to look a certain way. The big-minded argument is that Chassidus is big enough to speak to all Yidden the way they are, on their terms.
Bashir who?
Right, on their terms, and their shape, and that's probably ultimately the real definition of Afatz Samayanis, right? everybody has to look the same way, you're just bringing everybody to the same place. It's to talk to everyone.
Right. And ultimately the test of Yidden is if you can love people that you know are never going to, or not necessarily going to ever adopt your way of life.
Right.
As long as you have an agenda that you going to try to change them to do things the way you do it, that's, first of all, it's not genuine.
Right.
And secondly, it doesn't necessarily benefit anybody.
Right.
But when you are able to love people, knowing that they're going to do things their way and you're going to do things your way, but obviously soul is the overrider,
right,
over it all. That's when it really makes. That's when it's truly meaningful.
Yeah. I know this is at the end of the conversation, and whoever listened to the end probably doesn't need this disclaimer, but just for the sake of the disclaimer, I at least, and I'm sure you also, I'm not trying to say that other people or other shluchim are lacking, or it's not the point. It's more the ideas that are out there. There are certain ideas that float and certain ways that people speak. I have not made that sacrifice of being on shlichus and being there for other people the way shluchim are. So I am not in a position to sit here and kind of critique how people do it and if they have enough, obviously, soul or not. But I think I can speak to the memories I have of Chabad of Hong Kong and to the example that I saw in you and Mommy and growing up in Chabad of Hong Kong. And I think that's something worth doing and something that I'm very proud to do and something that I'm very happy to do. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, so to circle back to the beginning of the conversation, I think this podcast is a tremendous service to Chabad, and there's much more that's been left out that needs to be discussed. Just as one example is the subject of Chabad looking after our own children,
right,
which is today a very critical subject and one that we didn't get a chance to touch upon. But that's also been something that we dedicated a lot of our life towards that.
Right.
And you'll recall, of course, the Yeshiva Yaldei Shluchim.
Yeah, at the time was also ridiculed, but yeah.
Right, and the dormitory for girls, pioneering that and so on, because we have to make our own children, just because their names are not Justin or Jason or Beatrice,
right?
They're not less deserving.
I mean, it's a whole different conversation. But I first of all, I agree 100%. But I feel like in many ways, as I take more and more steps back from it with time, I feel like the reason why there was that pushback at the time to it, or at least the lack of support, the lack of solidarity around these ideas that today are commonplace, is for the reason I discussed at the beginning. You were from the first people to be so far out. So the desperation or the urgency, like we didn't even get to this, but when I was 9 years old, Mommy started going. We would go to Australia for 4 months a year. So Mommy would take us all to Australia for 4 months a year, and you'd come in and out from Hong Kong. That's a 10-hour flight. I spent months alone in Australia, right? So, that was a very urgent problem to solve. And I think it was just a matter of time for younger shluchim who had gone out after you to catch up and realize that there's a problem here. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just saying, I think you might be underestimating the fact that you were the first.
Right.
It might just be that, it might just be that, what do they say? If you have the right idea early, it just does, I forget, there's a better line for it, but a lot of people, there's a successful company and someone else had the same exact idea, but just 2 years too early, and it wasn't the world wasn't ready for it yet, or the world didn't get it yet. Why it was so necessary. And
It's all in the timing.
Yeah, it's all in the timing, and I think that's part of the price you pay when you're the first out the door. When you're the first out the door, there's today everybody, you were the first, I think, to do any form of online schooling, right?
Right.
Okay, a few years later, everyone needed it, and also online became a more usable medium. But without getting into that whole conversation, I think it's another kind of testament to the fact that this was a pioneering effort, and hopefully one day we'll have another conversation and go into more detail about what that was like, and maybe we'll discuss more the years of growing up in Hong Kong and those things. But I think at least in this conversation we kind of, to me at least, what I gained from it, or the framing that I gained from it, is that there is something immense that comes from putting yourself or finding yourself in a situation where you have to ask yourself difficult questions. Right?
Absolutely.
Right. And it's interesting how, in so many ways, come to think of it, the questions of the Jew in Asia, the questions of the shliach in Asia, are on some way or another could be traced to the questions of your parents in Detroit. And, and on some level, it goes all the way back to Avraham Avinu. Right? It's the question of the individual against the world. Anyway, appreciate you doing this. It's been a great ride.
Pleasure.
Let's do it again.
Okay.
The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentance Doors by Oren Sor Nadav Vachar and is used with their permission.